Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games, right? Different view because, I just got a bunch of new games and I thought this would be a slightly better background, aesthetic view for this conversation. What we're talking about today, and this is going to be a little bit divisive. I mentioned it last week. Twitter controversy, social media, content media controversy. Controversy, I use that with quotes, right? Where you had people getting swords from Chip Theory Games. Literal $200 hand-forged swords with customized logos engraved on them, right? Okay. More than just, say, a review copy of a game. So the debate, the ever social Twitter engagement, was very chirping back and forth about how this is significantly both biasing and obviously clearly not biasing because it's just viewed as a thank you, right? So what do you think about that? How do you feel about that? Where is the line when it comes to bias? How biased are you? We're talking about explicit bias. We're talking about implicit bias. We're talking about social bias. Stigmatization of that sort of concept in our society, or the lack thereof nowadays. Let's talk. As I sort of go through True Bang Legends game book here, this is the rule book. This thing's massive. What I'm talking about here is the fact that people were saying, look, you can't buy my opinion with a $200 sword. This is a nice sword. It's a thank you gift for covering our games, which a lot of the time were given for free to the same group of people that got the sword. And also sort of a thank you for being nice to our games, right? But no way in any shape or form influencing our opinions by the fact that they were free or by the fact that we're giving you a thank you gift, right? And that's a very reasonable argument. That makes a lot of sense on a basic level, right? It does. Where people can say, okay, look, you're giving me something, but I'm going to say, you know what? You can give me all the stuff you want, but it's not going to influence me. On an individual micro basis, with an implicit bias being the issue here, that you're more aware of it if you're given something like that, that you need to be extra careful about not being biased, right? The whole explicit versus implicit is explicit being, stuff that you can control, and implicit being stuff that's not necessarily something that you're as conscious of with any of this stuff, right? And the issue that I, immediately think of when I see something like that, and why I am on sort of, the middle ground here, is because there is some bias there. You have to be biased. People, really the issue that concerns me the most is that people were flat out saying, this is in no way whatsoever ever going to cause me any bias. And I'd say, yeah, it should cause you. It is biased. It is going to bias you, period. It is. The fact that you're denying it makes me concerned that you don't realize that this could be a source of bias. You should be thinking, yes, guys, this is going to cause me to be biased. I'm going to have to be even more careful now that I've got this because of undue influence that I'm not even aware of, right? The example that always comes to mind when I see this, and I saw people trying this sort of like semi-straw man argument. Hey, if you knew what the cosmetics, I saw that on Twitter, the cosmetics review side of things do. I get gift baskets, or I got gift baskets like that all the time. On the video game side, oh, they do all sorts of things like this. On the movie, they give this, that, and that. And you're using that as an example of how this isn't a bad thing. And I'm like, wait a second. You don't really realize what you're actually saying there, right? You're literally pointing out examples of people trying to buy influence with gifts. That is marketing 101. Don't believe me? Take the United States, for example. Let's talk bigger picture outside of media, right? And this is a little bit apples and oranges, but you'll see where I'm going with it at the same time. Let's talk about healthcare. For years, decades, pharmaceutical companies have spent billions with a B on this sort of thing. Everything from lunches to pens to retreats for providers, physicians, PAs, in order to get them to prescribe their products. Pens. And you know what? They didn't do it because it didn't work, folks. You don't spend billions doing it if it don't work. And it does. And that's why healthcare now is more explicit about that sort of thing. That's why a lot of healthcare systems have gotten away from even allowing or having the appearance of implicit bias in prescribing patterns, because the scientific studies, the evidence-based studies are out there saying that it really does influence. Now, again, this is where I'm going with this, on a macro scale, prescribing patterns of drugs. The ones that got those benefits, prescribed those drugs from those companies more. Period. That's not disputable. That is a fact. That is a fact. Just like the fact that I need to add this and I need to get some sleeves because I got this game in a trade and it already had sleeves. So now I'm screwed and I'm going to buy sleeves for this one. Otherwise, it's not going to match. That's a fact. Where I'm going with this, though, is that if pens and free lunches are going to cause people, without even realizing it necessarily, and that's the implicit, because the explicit is people saying, you know what, I am going to view them favorably of this, gift. I am going to prescribe more because I want more of it, or because I enjoyed what I got in the first place. That's not what I'm talking about here, because, all of the people that got these swords, I'm not going to say any of them are going to do that. No. But on the macro side of things, right? On the macro scale of things, just as with the healthcare example there, overall, not necessarily on the micro, like not every physician, for example, that got a free lunch or that got a pen automatically did that, right? No. I guarantee that it was not every single one, right? But there were enough that it could be unarguable that it had an undue influence on their behavior. And so that is where I'm going with this. A $200 sword, even if it's sitting on the back shelf of your room, you are going to be consciously or even potentially unconsciously aware that it's there and it was gifted to you, and how it may affect your viewing of things in the future. And my concern is that if you're someone that says it's not going to whatsoever, and you just dismiss that outright, well, then you're at risk for not even being aware of your own implicit bias. That's more of the issue, right? It's not the issue of whether or not you have bias. I have tons of bias. Have you listened to my channel? Have you listened to me rant and rave on any of this stuff? I have tons of bias. I like this sort of thing. I love this sort of thing. I think this is going to be an amazing game. I'm biased. But you know what? I know that I have those biases, so when I talk about those things, I make sure to say, hey guys, this is me. Hey guys, this is this. But if you're just going to dismiss your own biases and think that you can be completely neutral after getting something like that as well, you may be able to. But pound for pound, as we've seen across any business, hobby, media thing, everybody is not. And so the question just is, well, who's not going to be right? And that's the problem at the same time. Because if I tell you 1 out of 100 people is going to be that, the problem is that all 100 people are probably going to look exactly the same on the surface. Or if I tell you 5 out of 100 are going to be all the same, right? The problem is all 100 are going to look exactly the same. And I'm not going to be able to tell you the 1 from the 5. For a consumer, if I can't tell which one of you is the 5, that's an issue from my side of things as a consumer. You personally, if you're one of the people that got the sword, that's awesome. I have nothing against that. I think it's a great gift. I'm jealous. My own bias is that I'm jealous I didn't get one. Right? I have no problem saying that. At the same time, I have no problem in telling you that if I got one of those, it would cause me to feel like I would have to be very, very extra careful that I didn't have some implicit bias because of that, because I felt indebted, because I wasn't aware of the indebtedness that I felt, the debt that I felt to them in the first place for giving me something like that, that if I didn't do something as good as I had before for them, or the way I had approached it before them, that they may not reciprocate those feelings in the future. Because at the end of the day, most of us, again, me, myself included, very much so, we want to be liked. And I want to people please. And I want to be liked by people in general, right? It's not like it's a massive gift by any means. And the majority of the people, I think, I don't even know, I only saw like a 10 or so people that got it. All of the big people got it, right? And that was the whole other side tangent note of Chip Theory Games coming out on Twitter and saying, like, we also sent it to a bunch of people that don't like our games too. And I was like, well, what's the point of that? Why would you send these swords to people who don't like your product? That makes even less sense. Just like say, hey, we really appreciate your critique. Like, there's a fine line there too, right? And I'm, again, no ill will towards Chip Theory. I mean, they make an awesome product. These swords are freaking awesome. Again, I'm being totally transparent. I wish I had one of those swords. I have no qualms about saying that. I think we all do. But you have to realize the strings that go along with that, even if, there are, again, pure non-cynical, pure innocence side of things, assuming what Chip Theory has done just purely in goodwill. Even in that goodwill, they have to realize that they are potentially introducing implicit bias on the receiver's side of things. And now you may not take my word on this, right? People are going to say, like, I don't have any implicit bias. There are tests that literally study this very thing that say, here, take this bias test. And then it reveals that almost everyone has some implicit bias. I mean, now this same study that we're talking about here, the same test, it doesn't have a huge correlation to behavior, but over the larger macro scale, it definitely plays a role. And again, the reason people shout this back as the argument, right, is because, frankly speaking, it's not nice. It doesn't feel good to say, oh yeah, I'm biased. Oh yeah, I have this bias already, right? That doesn't make you feel good. But the term that they use is implicit social cognition, which is more of the term that we use in media, because implicit bias implies more of the justice and social demographics and racial ethnicity disparities and things like that. So this is a slightly different term, but it's in the same realm. And that's why it's applicable. I mean, at the same time, I think this is also no different on a macro or micro scale of things like this, right? Like, if I get something as a review copy, how critical are you going to be? How conscious of that are you in your thinking? Because that's also the common echo that I've heard across many various channels, and I mean that more in a metaphorical sense rather than a literal sense, many metaphorical channels over the past couple of years of the lack of critical critique of games. Now that's not to say there isn't any, and that's not to say that there can't be any, or that people are doing a poor job or anything like that, but the overall appearance of that has definitely gone down, right? I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me on that sense of things, right? We've seen the rise of paid previews. We've seen the rise of previews in general. We've seen the rise of just paid content. And those, are almost easier because the explicit bias is there. You can see it. They're getting paid. Okay. But the implicit bias, when you've got, even myself getting a review copy of something or a finalized copy of something after I talk about it in the first place, the effect of that is very hard to measure, right? Because it's $20, it's $30, and people are going to say, you spend 20 hours playing the game and another 3 or 4 hours making the video and editing the video and taking care of it, and you're getting $20 or $30 worth of game in return for, or $50 worth of game, for example, in return for the hours spent, and the hours spent based on an hourly basis there is poor. And so why would anyone ever do that? Well, the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter how much there is involved or what the value is, that it can still cause some of that. And again, what's concerning to me is you have people saying, well, I'm not affected by that whatsoever. It doesn't matter. I can clearly, you may think you can, but the more you think you can, the more it makes me concerned that you don't even realize what you're having in the first place, right? It sort of also reminds me and ties into something else that we've seen recently with Jurassic World Legacy. The Dice Tower just did their little Foursquare review thing where they've got 4 different people talking about it. And it was sort of disconcerting there because when I just look at that and tie it into this example, and you're going to go, well, how is that tying into it, Chris? Well, the whole concept of, I believe, their review system in that sense is to have 4 different people playing the game and giving their own independent assessments of things. Now, again, I could be completely wrong on that. Maybe I'm misconstruing the whole concept, right? But to give more input into the channel, which has grown significantly, to give viewers different thoughts. And that, along with another recent review of the same type, you had all 4 people giving exactly the same score. In Jurassic World Legacy's situation, they gave 3s. And another one, they gave 6s, right? And to get all of the exact same scores, because these are scores that are given, they give, half values too, like 9.5, 8.5, 9, 6, 3, whatever it may be, right? And you have 4 people with all of the exact same scores on 2 different situations. And again, I'm not sure how many times that's happened. I'm not sure how many times it does happen. How do you all end up? What are the odds that you all end up at the exact same score on the exact same game with all having different biases about your own personal tastes in the first place, right? And the fact of the matter is, well, you don't. You clearly are influenced or influencing other people at that table situation, whatever it may be. You have to acknowledge that aspect of things. And I think that was the concerning thing that I saw in the comment section. There's this huge diatribe over on Board Game Geek talking about this game and the reviews and the comments back and forth. Like, are you realizing the bias that you're creating on the people around you? Or are you realizing how their influential behaviors, patterns, thoughts are having an effect on you? If someone in that situation is not having fun, are you subsequently not having as much fun either? If you were with a group of people that were having more fun, regardless of how good the game is, how big of influence is that going to have on your feelings? I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. I'm just totally rambling about this. But the tie it back into the beginning. What would it take to have influence on you? Is it a $20 game? Is it a $200 sword? What if a publisher sends you a $2,000 board game table? What if they send you a $10,000 board game table? Let's be clear. None of us are perfect. There's going to be some level in which it's going to buy influence. But the problem is, as a casual bystander, I don't know your internal workings. And unless you were explicit about being, aware of those, it makes it hard for me to discern as someone who wants to trust other people's opinions on things. Because ultimately, that's why we watch these other channels, right? It's why we tune in. It's why we subscribe. It's why we have all of these different situations in the first place. It's because we want to trust other people's opinions to tell us what to do. And all of a sudden, if I don't know, again, not saying that anyone is doing this, but if I am, someone who made this game, if I'm someone who is part of this company and I tell you that this game is the best game I've ever played, or that, you should really be looking at this one over another one, but I'm involved in it in the first place, how much can you trust that opinion? You want to, but at the same time, there's always this little nagging thought, right? Whether that's Kickstarter, GameFound, big channel, small channel, whatever it may be. I mean, even me, not immune to it whatsoever. That's my biggest concern on a daily basis when I do these videos of these previews or these impressions or these reviews that I get from, I'm trying to balance it as someone who does not do this for a living, as someone who's not in the hobby, right? Like, as a couple people have told me, like, hey, you don't want to criticize a publisher. They're not going to send you stuff. They're not going to talk to you in the future. Well, that's biased then, right? If you're telling me not to do that, if I'm, not saying things that they're going to like, that's your bias that you're trying to influence me, because I may not have that same tie that has that same implicit bias that you're trying to give me as an explicit bias. Am I making sense? Am I just rambling now? I guess what I'm saying, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, Chip Theory Games did it purely out of good intentions. Again, I can't read minds. I'm not going to assume anything ill-wise. But you have to be aware of the appearance of that in the first place, especially to the group of similarly overlapping people that you're having games reviewed by, that you're giving games to in the first place, and that are getting a sword. There is going to be an appearance of conflict of interest. Regardless, it's going to have that appearance. I mean, just like with Alex starting over on GameFound. There is a serious appearance of conflict of interest if he's going to cover games on Kickstarter and crowdfunding elsewhere. I'm guessing he's probably going to try to do it, even more carefully. But regardless, there is going to be that appearance, period, by the nature of things at that point. And so you, as the consumer, as the person, watching behind the screen, ultimately has to say, how much do I care about that? How much do I think it's actually playing a role? And where does that put me in terms of how I feel ultimately. Because, I mean, you're going to have people that are going to say, I don't really care if they got a sword. Great. You know, I still going to listen to their value. I don't think it's safe for them. And you're going to have people that are going to at the end of the spectrum, because I've seen that both on the sword thing, on the dice tower side of things, on even, you know, the video that Alex put out in terms of, you know, I'm starting at GameFound. So you're going to have people across the board. And it's just ultimately, it's still a good conversation to have and not just dismiss because you think you're right and, you know, clearly this is the answer to all things, you know, whatever side of things you fall on in terms of the argument, or as a person who got the sword or didn't. We have to talk about this stuff. And sniping at each other in short form tweets, Facebook messages, or Board Game Geek threads is not, I know, right? Believe it or not, the most conducive to an actual discussion. Shocker. So that's why I do it, as unpopular as this conversation is to talk about in the first place. You know, I'm probably going to upset some people by even being willing to talk about this issue. So be it. It's important. You know, just because other industries do it a certain way doesn't make it right. I mean, your parents ever say that to you? Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean you should. Food for thought. There you go. Open rambling. Didn't even talk about these games too much. Rise of Eeks, True Bang Legends, and Puzzle Strike 2 here. Got some heavy hitters. If I would have put Oathsworn here in front of me, you wouldn't even be able to see me over the pile of games the whole time I rambled and ranted. And you probably would have preferred that. I'm not really that appealing to look at anyway. But you know what? That's all I got. Stay classy. Rant away. Rant done. Rant over. Have a great day. See you around.